the Wilf Impact Center for Public Interest Law and the Criminal Justice Institute, all of New York Law School, I welcome you to the 176th City Law Breakfast. I'm Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and Director of the Center for New York City Law. Thank you for attending and for helping to make City Law Breakfast such an important public forum. I want to thank our three generous and loyal founding sponsors of the City Law Breakfast series. They are Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. We are delighted they've been with us for decades, and we're delighted that they are still with us. I also want to thank you, the attendees, who voluntarily contribute when you sign up to attend our breakfast. Your names with thanks will be listed after every breakfast in the email sent with the link to the video. We are enormously grateful for these contributions that help make City Law Breakfast possible. After Alvin Bragg's prepared remarks, we will have a question and comment session. You may submit a question or comment at any time during the breakfast, and we encourage you to do so. We will collect the questions as they come in. To submit a question or comment, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Please identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. Following the questions and comments, we will invite Dean Anthony Crowell to join in a conversation with Alvin Bragg. We are delighted to welcome District Attorney-elect Alvin Bragg to our City Law Breakfast. Alvin Bragg is no stranger to New York Law School. He has been a visiting professor of law here at New York Law School for the last 3 years, and naturally he's been teaching criminal law and criminal procedure. Professor Bragg has been a wonderful colleague and a great resource for our students. Alvin Bragg grew up in Harlem, graduated from Trinity School in Manhattan, Harvard College, and Harvard Law School. After clerking for U.S. District Court Judge Robert Patterson Jr., Bragg began practice at the premier defense firm of Morvillo and Abramowitz. He then embarked on his government career, serving at different times as an assistant United States attorney here in the Southern District of New York and as an assistant attorney general. At the AG's office, Bragg led a unit responsible for investigating police killings of unarmed civilians and eventually rose to become Chief Deputy Attorney General. In a recent interview during the election campaign, Bragg explained why he would bring unique experience to the position. He said, and I paraphrase, he sued the New York State Police for using excessive force on protesters. He prosecuted a sitting DA for not doing a proper investigation of an officer who shot and killed an unarmed black man. He prosecuted an FBI agent for lying and obstructing justice. He headed the unit in the Attorney General's office investigating police killings. And he is currently representing Eric Garner's mother and others in a case seeking key details about Mr. Garner's death. These are the values and experiences that will help make Alvin Bragg a truly great district attorney. New York Law School is honored to welcome Alvin Bragg to the City Law Breakfast Forum. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Sandler. It is an honor to be here today and more broadly to be a part of the New York Law School community. It is humbly fitting that as kind of the chapters turn at the end of the year that I would be invited to be a part of the breakfast series, because that's the beginning of my New York Law School relationship. Back in the early 2000s, when our dean was counselor to Mayor Bloomberg, I was at the city council responsible for the council's litigation, and the breakfasts were a meeting place for city lawyers to come and be edified, come and learn about matters of importance to our city, and to socialize and get to know one another. And it was in that context that I got to know our great dean and formed a lasting friendship, and in many ways, is what brought me back to New York Law School after my government tenure. And it was also during that time I became familiar with Professor Sandler's scholarship. And remember at that time being very interested in consent decrees and reading his book. So it is really humbly fitting for me to, in this chapter, I hope the book with the NYLS community continues, and I expect it to continue to be a part of the community. But as this chapter ends, it is humbly fitting to me to draw it to near a close here. I note that in more recent history, we've had some exceptional speakers at the breakfast in the criminal justice space. I'm recalling shortly before the shutdown due to the pandemic, we had President Jeremy Travis give an excellent presentation talking about some of the history and context with some great slides and discussion. And then before that, we had my dear friend Janet Sable, who's the attorney in charge of the Legal Aid Society. And I'm remembering very profound theses and a rich discussion, which is reflective of the breakfast. I come today with what I hope is not too simplistic a message for this audience, but one that is very basic, which is that New York City is the best place on earth. And I'm honored to say that at what we all know is New York's law school. And if we use, and I'm going to use their first names to really underscore the affection I have for them, Bill and Anthony's model of leadership and what they've done during this challenging times. I think it's the hardest chapter for leadership in recent memory, certainly. And Anthony was around for the last hard one in 9/11 when he was in city service. But I think if we use New York Law School as a model, there is no doubt that New York City, the best place on earth, is going to emerge fairer, more just, safer, more humane. And I look to a few things, and I want to extrapolate from what New York Law School has done into the broader discussion of criminal justice. But I look at how during this time we've continued to have analytically rich and rigorous discussions about weighty issues. We've put scholarship and academic discussion and instruction in the classroom, whether it be virtual or live in person, at the center. But at the same time have not just been New York Law School, the academic community, but New York Law School, the neighbor, with our dean reminding us of our presence and relationship with our Tribeca community. I've looked with great awe and respect as I've seen my colleagues not just talk about evidence and criminal procedure, but talk with their students about the challenges in their lives, particularly during this time. And I've tried to replicate that as I've looked at them. So not just great, rich academic discussion, but putting people and our students in particular at the center, so centering human conditions. And I think that if we do that, that is going to be a blueprint for New York City coming back. Rich, dynamic, rigorous academic discussion with people in their real lives at the center. That is what I suggest is our prescription for a fairer, safer New York as we emerge. And the thing that I want to focus on this morning the most is Interdependence. I love that we're being sponsored by several different New York Law School institutes this morning, because that's something else I think about when I think of the law school, how we are interdisciplinary. And far too often, particularly in the criminal justice space, but I think in all of our body politic, we are segmented, compartmentalized, and siloed. And New York Law School, we are integrating them, and that's essential to our return as a city. And I think specifically in my space of criminal justice, of the inextricable link between safety and fairness. All too often, we have discussions where we spend 30 minutes on justice and safety and law and order, and then we spend another day at another time talking about fairness. That's what our newspapers sometimes reflect. That's what the body politic, that's what sometimes our commentators on TV. And we need our society to be more like New York Law School, where we are integrating that. And so I want to spend some time really at that intersection of public safety and fairness. It's where, in some ways, I've lived my life and certainly have focused my career. I like to say that your very first, most basic civil right is to be able to walk safely to your corner store. But the flip side of that proposition is that we will not, in my experience, have enduring public safety if we do not have fairness and trust in the system. The data is clear. The neighborhoods where we have the most acute police accountability and fairness issues are also the neighborhoods where we have the most acute traditional public safety issues. My life follows this pattern. So as Professor Sandler said, I'm a product of the village of Harlem. Grew up during the 80s, during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. And before I was 21, I had a gun pointed at me 6 times. 3 by NYPD officers, and you didn't need to be a 1L at New York Law School to know they were unconstitutional searches. I knew that as a teenager. So 3 times at gunpoint, unconstitutional searches, but also 3 times arising from traditional public safety issues. So right there, I don't make the numbers up. It's just 3 and 3. That's how my life falls very neatly. And I think that's the experience of so many others, whether they be gunpoint encounters or other kind of encounters of dually facing traditional public safety challenges and also facing police accountability challenges. So, while I was being stopped 3 times during that same chapter of my life, I had a semi-automatic gun pointed at me by someone who wasn't a police officer, a homicide victim at my doorstep, and a knife at my throat. So I went off to college and law school, really with a puzzle of how can this be? How can, at the same time where I'm facing such militaristic force from those entrusted to keep us safe, am I not even safe? And that's the puzzle and the question that I've carried with me. It's been the focus for my career. Professor Sandler very generously, during the introduction, mentioned a few cases that I've done focused on police accountability, and also mentioned my time as a more traditional prosecutor. That's the intersection, that's the interdependence, which I think is essential to us returning as a safer and fairer city. I am particularly grateful to New York Law School for allowing me, as Professor Sandler mentioned, to be involved in the representation of members of Eric Garner's family. And the transition, I came straight from government, as chief deputy of the New York State Attorney General's office, helping to oversee the state's chief law enforcement office. And then shortly after arriving at New York Law School was presented with what I view as a privilege of a lifetime as a lawyer to represent Ms. Carr in a transparency lawsuit against the city, seeking details now 7+ years later after Mr. Garner was killed. But some asked me outside of the New York Law School community, I'll note, well, how are you going to do that? How are you, as a former prosecutor and a current district attorney candidate, how are you going to interrogate the police about this? And my response was, that is exactly the point. These are interdependent issues. These are inextricably linked. The petitioners who have the honor of representing care deeply about public safety. And I think we all should care deeply about transparency, which is and was the focus of that matter. And so to me, to separate and need to have a camp of lawyers who are focused on traditional public safety and another camp focused on civil rights is the wrong approach. And so I've been so honored to be a part of a faculty that's merged it and had rich conversations with our Criminal Law Society, which is a group of students who are unpacking these issues in a very integrated way, or to be a part of our faculty discussions, which are talking about matters in such a cohesive way. So that interdependence is, I believe, essential to a fairer and safer New York City. The second piece, which I talked about and how Anthony and Bill have led our beloved institution, is focusing on people. And I think in order to really get and grapple with the importance of this interdependence, it's necessary to talk to the people behind these cases and stories. So I would challenge anyone to spend an hour with Ms. Carr, Eric Garner's mother, and not walk away with a newfound, profound understanding of what police accountability means and its ramifications. I would challenge folks to spend time with my brother-in-law, who I talked about while campaigning for district attorney. Some of you may know he was incarcerated for more than a year for gun possession. He then came and stayed with my wife and me for some time as he was attempting to re-enter. And I learned so much, someone who spent 20+ years in the courtroom dealing with these issues. I learned more from him. I've told him he is capable of teaching a criminal procedure class at New York Law School based on his lived experience. I learned about the NYPD warrant squad when they banged on my door at 5 a.m. one morning looking for him even though he's no longer living for me. When I asked, I said, well, what's the cause for the knock? I was a prosecutor at the time, and I think probably was the most emboldened I felt in any interaction with an officer. I said, what are you doing at my doorstep at 5 a.m. waking up my toddler? What's the offense? What's the warrant for? It was for an open container. And I said, really? I've got cases where we have people doing real harm to public safety. The warrant squad should be out looking at those. So spending some time with him, as I've had the occasion to do, or others like him, is where we need to be. And I'll just stay on him for a moment. Maybe this is my application on his behalf to become an adjunct professor, because so many of his stories have edified so many. I know about prison conditions from lawsuits I've brought, particularly when I was at the Attorney General's office. But the most profound discussion and learning I've had about prison conditions is from talking to him when he, quite reluctantly, we've been side by side in his journey throughout these cases as I supported him, but really didn't talk about his time in solitary confinement until much later, telling me that he ended up in solitary confinement because as a young man, I mean, he was not much older than 18 in an adult facility, forced to fight for his dinner, and realizing that if he didn't stand up for himself, his time would be much harder. And then he was put in the hole. And he told me, and I'll never forget the words, he said, all I could do was push-ups and read the Bible for days on end. That image is seared in my brain. So I challenge folks to spend an hour with someone who's been in custody and have that conversation. I think it will fundamentally change the thinking about incarceration. The same is true for our survivors of violent crime. Very recently, I was at an event with loved ones who'd lost family members to gun violence. And we released balloons in their honors. You listen to them talk, and you listen to the pain in their voices. And I was forever altered. And then lastly, and maybe most profoundly to me, because it's the furthest from my own personal experience, I've learned so much from talking to survivors of sexual assaults. A number of survivors who I have the chance to interact with, hearing how the system, police and prosecutor, can treat them in a coarse way as pieces of evidence and not as whole people, has for me given me a fresh eye on those cases. And so my challenge to myself is to bring those voices inside the district attorney's office and let them be the drivers of the way we approach all of our work, both public safety and fairness work. So I want to use a little bit of my remaining time to talk about two specific issues. I've touched upon them, but just want to highlight them as what I believe are urgent day one issues for me on January 1 as the incoming Manhattan District Attorney. And I want to put in place the approach of kind of rigorous empirical discussion applied to these two issues, but centering people. So the first is guns, and the data, the empirical evidence is clear. We have an uptick in shootings. They are concentrated in Upper Manhattan when I talk about Manhattan. They involve young Black and brown, and I'm going to use the word kids. They may be over 18, but they are youth in many occasions in my eyes. And to underscore my point about the interdependence, those most affected by these recent shootings are those who, in many ways, were the initiators of our post-George Floyd discussion, happening, literally gun shootings on the same blocks that I marched on post-George Floyd. So what do we do about it? What is the prescription for this harsh reality? One, accountability. I've been a traditional prosecutor, and we will bring cases to hold those accountable. I've done gun trafficking, armed robbery, gun possession cases. But also we've got to think more broadly. I'm thinking about our colleague, Professor Abraham, and how she introduced me to restorative justice, sitting in New York Law School, I guess now 3 or 4 years ago. And you talk about the power of narrative and voices, sitting in a very quiet, still large classroom as two parents talked about opting for a restorative justice process when their daughter was killed. Hearing their voices opened my eyes to this approach, and then, of course, influenced by the scholarship that Professor Abrahams introduced us to. So that marriage of the personal voice and the empirical and qualitative evidence. So accountability, both standard cases and through the lens of restorative justice. Looking and not revisiting the perils of the past. So knowing that we're not going to police our way exclusively out of these shootings through traditional, some of the militaristic policing I talked about that I suffered from as a child and that I worked on at the Attorney General's office. I know from my own work that when we look at the height of stop and frisk, only 0.1% of the stops from a 4-year period resulted in a conviction for a gun charge, 0.1%. And I also know as a prosecutor, those stops came at a dizzying, staggering cost to other cases because it made it so much harder to get the trust and credit from those we needed as witnesses. So accountability, not slipping into police practices that we know alienate the very people that we're trying to protect. And then engaging in rigorous discussion about the realities of bail. I've heard a lot of the discussion suggesting that bail reform is causing gun violence. I've yet to see, because it does not exist, the scholarship that supports that. And indeed, the NYPD's own data suggests to the contrary. So need to grapple with it, need to continue to analyze it, need to realize that the last couple of years are anomalous due to this pandemic, but to embrace that discussion and have it and not to make it one-dimensional and to look and dive into the empirical research. And then 2 more issues on gun violence. I recently had the honor of being with our senior senator, the majority leader, Senator Schumer, when he talked about introducing $5.3 billion into our Build Back Better bill that we focus on community violence interrupters. A key part that was not in years past a part of our policing response of those who've been affected by the justice system, engaging with and being a part of the solution. And so hoping that passes the Senate and that we can benefit from that funding here. And even if we don't, it will certainly be a part of the solution here in Manhattan. And then lastly, guns are not made in Manhattan. Indeed, they're not made really in New York State. When I was at the Attorney General's office, I worked with a group of phenomenal data scientists who looked at every single gun found at a crime scene in the state of New York and traced that gun back to its last lawful sale from a federally licensed firearm dealer. And the data is illuminating. It shows the pathway of the guns coming into our state. And you look, and sometimes you have dealers who are selling guns in the dozens that end up at crime scenes in very short order. We need to be circling those in red on a map, working with my former federal colleagues and other local prosecutors throughout the country to stop the flow of guns, even to getting to the hands of our children here in Manhattan. So that's my example for thinking about interdependence and centering the voices, knowing that those most affected by our post-George Floyd, our police accountability issues are, and I say those, this includes me. I had a shooting on my block about 3 weeks ago. The second issue I want to move to is Rikers. I think guns and Rikers are the 2 most urgent issues facing me on January 1. I clerked for a judge, as Professor Sandler said, the Honorable Robert P. Patterson Jr., who was phenomenal in many ways, and he would begin many of his sentencings by talking about his work post-Attica, which he was very, very felt was very important and really framed part of his professional existence. I think it is not alarmist or beyond exaggeration to compare what is going on in Rikers now. It may be pre-Attica. We were honored to have Dr. Homer Venters at an Impact Center event before the pandemic. I think he was our last Impact Center speaker. He was the chief medical officer at Rikers, and he talked about, this was pre-pandemic, this was before some of the heightened perils now. He talked about the conditions there, and he talked about what he saw as a medical professional. And the conditions he described were deplorable and unsafe then, and we know that they are worse now. It's a racial justice nightmare. We know who is primarily housed at Rikers, and I use that term housed in quotes. And for me, another startling fact and reality is that Manhattan sends a disproportionately higher share of people to Rikers than other boroughs. So we've got to examine who Manhattan is sending there. And then we also have to look at the prescriptions and look at what the data show us in terms of another way. We know that pretrial services work, particularly when I was in the federal system. We had more scaled up, particularly substance use disorder. We've got to invest in that. We know that in terms of getting people to return to court, text messaging works, reminding people of their dates. And we also know the data that we've got a high return rate. 88% of those on supervised release return. 88%, that is a high number. So we need to be focused on the data. And of course, we need to be ever mindful of public safety. That is, as I said, that is our interdependent issue, public safety and fairness. All violent crime is obviously disturbing, but a statistic I want to underscore is that of those who are out pre-trial, we've got 0.5% committing violent crime, 0.5%. Obviously, all of that, 0.5% is important, but we need to think about that in the context as we're framing policy, that it is 0.5% and focusing on what's the drivers of that, and not crafting policy for the 100% based on the 0.5. All too often, we forget the positive. And I want to go back to the issue of people's voices and censoring them. We need to be talking about the people who are out on pretrial release, who have the opportunity to tuck their child in at night. That is helping not just that person, not just that child, but an entire neighborhood. We need to talk about the person who's out on pretrial release, who's providing elder care, who is working in our small businesses, who's benefiting our communities in so many ways. The data is clear. When we support people with services, it reduces recidivism, and that's got to be a part of our discussion. I want to end in what hopefully will not be kind of a sharp departure. I think it's a part of the prescription, a part of the why take this approach of really having this cohesive discussion about safety and fairness centered on people, by answering the question that I get a lot these days. How do you feel about to be the first African-American district attorney in Manhattan? And I think the answer to that, which is a sort of a universal that feeds into some of the themes I've been trying to underscore today, goes to the human and to the integrated discussion of fairness and safety. So when I'm asked that question, I think I have two children, but I think of my son specifically, and something he said. He's younger, and sometimes we know the innocence gives folks some profound words. He said to me early in the pandemic, "Your dad, I don't want to wear a face mask." And he's an astute child who knows the science. And I said, "What do you mean you don't want to wear a face mask?" He said, No, I know I don't want to get sick. And I know that's a risk, but I'm a lot more concerned that a police officer will mistake me for a robber if I'm wearing a mask. He was 11 at the time. Let that internalized trauma kind of wash over you and think about what that did to my mind as a father. And then fast forward, a few weeks ago, I mentioned the shooting on my block. I'm no stranger to the yellow tape of a crime scene. I've done that professionally, but I was out in Brooklyn with my family I don't go to Brooklyn often. I stay in Manhattan a lot, but out in Brooklyn looking at the portraits of Michelle and Barack Obama. And it was a beautiful moment for our family. And then my phone started buzzing with neighbors who were telling me about the shooting on our block. And then we returned home that evening. The yellow tape was still up. There was a live gun on the ground next to an evidence tag. There were, shell casings everywhere. And as I said, obviously not foreign to me, but navigating with my children and wife through an active crime scene to come to our home brought back memories of my youth, but harder memories, because now I'm seeing it through the lens of as a parent. And those are sort of the bookends on the campaign for me. Starting with a child worried about police accountability, so much so he's willing to risk his life by not wearing a mask, and then navigating through shell casings to get to our home. That's what it means to me to be the first African-American district attorney, that those children know that their father is accountable for both public safety and fairness in Manhattan. And not just them, but my Sunday school teaching students I teach, my former Little League students, and not just the Black and brown children, but all of our children. This is about the future of our city. They are illustrative. They're in some ways placeholders for all of us. And I believe our path forward is, as I've tried to outline this morning, through this interdependent discussion of fairness and public safety, but focus on this chorus of voices from my two children to Miss Carr, to the survivors of gun violence, the survivors of sexual assault, all together in a chorus of great New Yorkers that will lead us to a fairer and safer Manhattan. So thank you so much for having me this morning. I look forward to our Q&A.
Thank you for a really wonderfully sensitive and broad talk. Thank you for your comments and the breadth of your comments, and for your and sharing with us such personal experiences. Right now, we're going to go to the question and comment period. They've been collected by Brian Kasuba, the Associate Director of the Senate, of the Center for New York City Law. Could be the Senate, we thank him and Lillian Valle Santiago and the staff of the center and the staff of the law school for their terrific work in putting together these breakfasts. So, Brian, what's the first question or comment?
Okay, great. Thank you, Ross. The first question is coming in from Asha Muldrow from Bart Schwartz GPS. Good morning, DA-elect Bragg. Thank you for being here today. I have followed your exceptional career dedicated to public service since your early clerkship with Judge Patterson, and I know you will be an excellent DA. Related to public safety, gangs continue to be a serious problem. I know that because I am a leader on the federal monitors team with Bart Schwartz for NYCHA. Do you have any specific plans relating to gangs?
So yeah, you definitely, and I'll say hello to Asha, who I know well, going back some years. It is, the gun violence I talked about, and I would sort of say sort of groups of, sometimes disturbingly young children as the drivers. And so I think some of the things I outlined in terms of, accountability through traditional cases, restorative justice. I'm very hopeful about this funding for community violence interrupters. I've seen the model up close, people who've been justice involved, going and running, what I call running to the fire with gun incidents, particularly between two rival groups. Often there's a first incident, and often, almost really inexorably, there's a second, which is the retaliation. And so having folks who are justice involved in some places, go places where police can't, and intervening so we don't have the escalation or retaliation, excuse me. And that can mean going to the hospital bed. We have that model, and that can mean also going to the rival group and just buying some time to talk about repercussions and to take the temperature down. Specifically as to NYCHA, and I think NYCHA is really some of the richest conversations I had about the intersection of public safety and fairness took place at NYCHA developments, which residents telling me about their safety concerns and saying, we feel unsafe, but then also sharing with me concerns about how their younger relatives have been treated, prior to the Floyd stop and frisk decision. And so I think we have to have a broad focus. Sometimes when I have those discussions, something as basic as locks. Many of our NYCHA housing don't have locks. Imagine living in an apartment building with no lock on the front door. A fairness issue and a public safety issue. Terrible lighting. So I think all of this goes in. We've got to have traditional, case making. We've got to find out who is firing the guns, but we've got to have it against the backdrop of using these other tools, our community violence disruptors, having our green spaces, having our lighting, having locks. So on guns and particularly with our youth group violence, my view is an all of the above approach.
Great, thank you. Our next question is coming from Michelle Winfield, State Committee woman. How do you plan to spend forfeiture funds, settlement money secured through violation penalties to benefit New York communities?
So this is a challenging issue, and there's been some recent reporting, on this in terms of the amount of money. So the current district attorney, as just for those who don't know the context, through a number of very, very big settlements, had a lot of forfeiture money, which was used to some very, very good ends on both traditional public safety and also kind of more broadly public health and public safety initiatives. That money is drawing to a close. It is mostly contractually committed or done. There's approximately $30 million or so remaining. And so we'll think about how to program that money. I have prioritized in my thinking mental health and reentry as ways that funding can be used in an impactful way. But I've also talked about opening it up to having a kind of a community participatory approach, as some of the council members do for their discretionary funding, really getting input from the communities on how to use that funding. So that's sort of within the four corners of the DA's office. But I think there's a bigger issue. We've had this funding going to great ends that is dwindling. And so we have to have a conversation with the city council, with the state legislature about baselining some of these things that we now know work. We know the funding, it's been shown. We've showed the efficacy and can talk about doing this the traditional way through an appropriations process. So I look forward to getting Michelle Winfeld's input on how that $30 million should be used, and other members in the community against the backdrop of my priority of mental health and reentry. But I ask all of us to join in a broad conversation with our incoming city council, which is going to have, I think, 3/4 of it's going to be new, I believe, and our state legislature about how we can keep some of this great work going.
Great. Our next question is coming from Allison Morpurgo. Thank you for your service. As tragic as the incidents by our police are, since the vast majority of crime against is not perpetrated by police, can you share your idea about quickly reducing the increased violent crime on our streets and protecting New Yorkers?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I try to focus on what I believe is the most acute issue, which is the gun violence of our kind of 7 index crimes. Gun violence is one, not just, I think, in and of itself important, but also as a driver psychologically of people's feelings of safety. So that's why I've focused there. But obviously we have other issues, and I believe the question was about violent crime. So I don't mean that to the exclusion of what we've seen, some of the train slashings, knife use, and other assaults. Particularly, I would note the rise in hate crime assaults. Like I said, I've spent the past 20 plus years as a prosecutor doing those kind of cases. I've tried an assault case. It's important. In my case, someone was hit over the head and required 7 staples. And it's important. We need to be treated judiciously, and we're going to handle those cases with care. But I do believe that the most important, you're right, certainly, if you look at the statistics, crime by police officers certainly is not the biggest one. You're right on that. But I do believe if you look at it, what is the most acute issue right now is gun violence. And so that's going to be my focus, but not to the exclusion of what I would say the next most urgent is assaults, with a subset of that being hate crimes.
Great. Our next question is coming from Polly Spain, chair from Manhattan CB7. What will your office do to address youth recidivism within the criminal justice system?
Yeah, this is a significant issue that is I think heartbreaking. I talked about my children are youth in that same sort of age cohort, and we are certainly seeing recidivism, I believe, is the right technical word as applied to children. What I've been doing is on the front end, really doing a lot of youth intervention, a lot of youth work, a lot of youth circles, talking to youth about repercussions, talking to them about what they feel they need to feel safe, about rivalries that are developing, and how to manage those issues. And so I think there's a big role that we play to be played by the district attorney on that upfront prevention. And I think particularly sort of going back to as much of this is concentrated in Upper Manhattan, an approach as a neighbor, an approach as someone who is a Sunday school teacher dealing with, I teach the high school class at my church, a former Little League coach, really having spent a lot of time with our youth to continue to do that, but to do that with the weight of the district attorney's office. I think that's very, very important. I've been talking to our teachers union, which has a kind of a pipeline program about getting assistant district attorneys involved in that. And I believe in the data supports that those kind of interventions and supports are very, very helpful. And to merge the two issues, I guess from the prior question of sort of police accountability and safety, I'm going to be with the Police Athletic League on Monday. That model is shown to be beneficial for both these issues, public safety and fairness. So I want to leverage that. And I believe we can do a lot on the front end on prevention.
Great. Our next question is coming from David Condriff, Executive Director of the Center of Community Alternatives. As former director of the Mayor's Office of Drug Abuse, I recall the controversy when we launched Needle Exchange that both saved lives and reduced drug use. Today, the launch of supervised injection sites by the Department of Health generates similar controversy. Do you support their launch and the evaluation of them?
So, and just again, for context, for those who may not know, I believe the question there were two sites that were opened, or if not opened, the announcement of their opening that's imminent in East Harlem and Washington Heights. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in follow the science and listen to the experts and a harm reduction approach to substance use disorder. One concern I do have, which has been echoed by a number of my neighbors, is if you look at the sort of per capita, usage where the issues are, there's an oversaturation, uptown. It's, there's certainly a need for these services, but something that a number of my neighbors are asking, and I think it's a question we need to be asking is, well, why not open more of these, and why are they all just uptown? And I think that's a question we need to ask. So I fully support the model. But particularly as a lifelong resident of Upper Manhattan, I can remember when Riverbank Park opened, great resource for us, but built on top of a plant, which I'm not a tort lawyer. I won't use causation from a legal sense, but I think many of us believe, caused an uptick in asthma rates. So I think we need to think about the equitable distribution of, and I'll call them resources. It's a resource, a public health resource, the equitable distribution. So look forward to being a part of future conversations of where additional sites may be located in Manhattan throughout the city.
Great. Our next question is coming from Mary McCory. Have you had any input into Eric Adams' selection of the police commissioner, and do you support his plan to reinstate the NYPD anti-crime unit?
So I've had no input. I believe this is, I hope I'm not breaching confidence. He's announcing his public safety transition committee, and I was invited to be on it. So I don't think I'm breaking news there, but and that's more broadly part of an ongoing discussion we've been having. The mayor-elect, who I did not know personally prior to this year, but he reached out to me in April, long before it was clear, well, certainly clear to me that I would be the DA-elect or he'd be the mayor-elect, but it's sort of in his wisdom and foresight, as someone who, walked a parallel path. He reached out to me as someone, my elder, I would say, who I think he saw in me someone who had been in law enforcement and had also, like he has, spoken out about accountability issues. And we had a great discussion. We didn't talk specifically about police commissioner. We really actually, frankly, didn't talk a ton about policy, but we got to know each other, and we've continued that throughout this year. So no, I don't anticipate having a specific role in personnel, but do hope to have sort of a seat at the table, and have been invited to have a seat at the table in the formation of policy through his committee. As to specific policing, whether it be kind of stop and frisk, the anti-gun unit, I certainly think of a parade of horribles. Amadou Diallo comes to mind. And obviously the current commissioners disbanded that unit. I believe what the mayor-elect has said is that he wants to do policing like that, but in a renewed way. And so I look forward to having that conversation of sort of what that renewal means. I have been part of a number of cases involving undercover officers. So certainly don't want to suggest, as if you look on Twitter, the suggestion that I don't believe in undercover officers. I believe fully in long-term investigations that dismantle systems. One of the cases I was most proud of as a federal prosecutor was a long-term investigation, which we prosecuted the owner of a $30 million business who laundered millions of dollars in drug money for a violent international cartel. We use extensive undercovers in that. So I support that, but the old unit, and particularly the civil rights infringements they were associated with, give me deep concern. So I look forward to the conversation and the revamped thinking. I look forward to hearing his insights on that.
Great. Our next question is coming from New York Law School's own Professor Kirk Burkhalter.
Watch out. It's going to be hard.
It might be a tough one. Good morning, Alvin. You and I have spoken about this issue. I have been quite disturbed by the misinformation regarding bail reform. Would you mind taking a moment to provide some clarity on the issue as it relates to the impact or lack thereof to the rise in violent crime?
Yeah. So first, Kirk, hope you're doing well. And I love it when someone he can answer this own question, but I guess I've got the mic, so I'm gonna answer it. I mentioned it briefly in my remarks. I've been very disturbed, and I think the way the reporting on these issues is really, really key, because it informs the broader public, and obviously not everyone has professors' wisdom and experience. For those who don't know, he was with the NYPD for years in senior rank. The evidence is just not there. Those who talk about a link between bail reform and the rise in violence, they cannot point to any study or data because it doesn't exist. And so I've said, look, let's study it. The last couple of years were anomalous. I think on the backdrop of our health and economic issues, let's study, let's analyze the data. But the jumping to conclusions to fit a kind of pre-designed narrative does a disservice to both public safety and fairness. It would cause us to shift resources. It undermines trust in the system, because when you say something and you can't support it, people then lose faith in those who are sworn to protect them. So the data just isn't there. And the last time I looked at the data, we had something like, I believe, 0.1% of those released on bail were anywhere near a shooting. This is now, the data needs to be refreshed. And I don't want to be. I will say, you don't have to necessarily believe me. It was the New York Post reporting on the NYPD's own data leading to that conclusion. So if we were in a traditional Zoom, I might try to drop that in the chat link. But I hope that answers your question, Kirk. Hope you're doing well.
Great. Next question is coming from Francis Scanlon from the City Bar. On a lighter side of the law, is it true that you are a music devotee, enjoyed and are a good singer? If true, what is your favorite musical genre?
Oh, well, I don't know how that rumor got started, because I can't hold a note. I enjoy music, but I can't sing. I played the piano as a youth. I can't read music anymore. So, but if I had to pick a musical genre, I am a 90s R&B hip hop. My kids tease me. I'm stuck in that era, a relic of that era. So that's what I like, but I can't rhyme, and I can't sing, and I can't play an instrument.
Great. Next question is from Professor Justin Murray, the Criminal Justice Institute's co-sponsor of this event. Thank you so much, Professor and DA-elect Bragg. As you know, most of the people in this country's prisons are serving time for a violent offense, not, say, a drug crime or a low-level order maintenance crime. This means that ending mass incarceration in this state and country will require changing the way we address violent crime. What ideas do you have for reorientating our approach to violent crime?
So I just have to pause and say, the embarrassment of riches that we have here at New York Law School with Professors Murray and Burkhalter, and others come to mind. Professor Abraham, who I mentioned, Professor Royfee. this is just the best place to think about these issues and to be a student studying them. And I wish we were at a roundtable so I could throw some of these questions back to folks who are an expert. But again, I've got the microphone, so I will answer. Look, I think there are a number of things that we can do, and I will again kind of point to Professor Abraham's work in the restorative justice space. Some think of that only as something for youthful indiscretions or minor offenses, but again, going back to that forum she had with the two parents, talking about having lost their daughter, a murder, a homicide, and how they, in that instance, driven by their Catholic faith, were persuaded the prosecutor to have a restorative justice, and they opted for a hybrid where there would be some prison time, but less than there ordinarily would be, so they could have a restorative justice approach. So I think that is one key building block that needs to be scaled up. Brooklyn, through Daniel Surratt's program, is doing that type of work, and we're looking to import that and scale that up in Manhattan. Obviously, just to unpack that a bit for those who aren't familiar with it, one thing our system just does not a good job with is those harmed directly, and certainly those harmed indirectly by violence. There's given a binary choice. Do you want something to happen? Jail or nothing. But when given the broader sense of you want someone to talk about why this happened, what the driver was, to get to the root cause, time and time again, the data show people are opting for that. So with consent and with that kind of discussion, we plan to do that in Manhattan. And I think that is a way to really get to the numbers in mass incarceration and violence, at the same time by making survivors, I don't want to say whole, but centering their trauma and reducing recidivism by getting to what was the driver of violence.
Our next question is from Pepe Chang de Castro, who's actually a former City Law Fellow and New York Law School alum. Thank you, Ross, Alvin, and New York Law School. In my position, I'm still seeing the lack of diversity at executive levels throughout various prosecutors' offices. Can you speak about any plans to commit to diversity at the executive level of your office?
We're going to do it. We are committed. When I was at the Attorney General's office, it was a commitment then, and we did it. I guess the question was an executive. We were thinking throughout the organization, and we partnered with a number of bar associations, the Muslim Bar Association in New York, the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, the Asian American Bar Association of New York. And so I've been in discussions with those groups, have been recruiting broadly. I'm not in a position yet to announce the full executive team, but as things are shaping up, I think we're going to have a team that reflects the diversity of Manhattan in all ways, including the racial, ethnic, religious, but also professional, and some of the voices and perspectives I talked about. And I would say, I think it's important at the executive, but I think what will take more time, but is equally as important, is throughout the ranks. And some of this, not to be too long-term, but some of this does even go back to the questions about youth engagement, talking about this is a career, this is an option, this is something we should be doing to create a long and rich pipeline.
Great. We're going to do one final quick question and then invite up Dean Anthony Crowell. This question is coming from Joetta Brown. What is the cooperation of the Manhattan DA's office with the DA's offices from the other boroughs?
So, I think there's a warm collegial relationship now. I'm not particularly in a position to talk about the current relationship because I just don't know. But from what I've seen, it seems to be a warm, cooperative working relationship. What I can talk about from personal experience is the really warm reception that I've gotten from other district attorneys in the city, both kind of on a personal level, talking about what this job means, and on a professional level, questions about staffing, programmatic questions. I mentioned something that we're looking to import from Brooklyn. And so I am looking forward to a really productive relationship. One of the things that is just different about, our city, or most places throughout the state, we've got 62 counties and 62 district attorneys, but elsewhere in the state, you just go up to Westchester, for example, that county has one DA and within it, multiple cities. New York is different, right? We've got, 5 counties within one city, which I think, really streams out for, coordination and consultation. And that's what I'm seeing so far and expect to see come January.
Great. So for those of you who didn't get to your questions, we promise to share those questions with Mr. Bragg so he can take a look at them. And again, at this point, we'd like to invite Dean and President Anthony Crowell to have a short conversation with Alvin.
Thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate that. And it is wonderful to see you, Mr. District Attorney-elect. We are beyond proud of you. And as a longstanding friend, I can't tell you what it means to see someone who has such integrity and intelligence and compassion ascend to this role, which is in need of someone with these talents and perspectives. So I toast you. If I had a glass of champagne this early in the morning, I might have a more difficult day, but I will say it's a glorious day to be able to celebrate you and to thank you for putting yourself forward so courageously for a position that is something that will be tremendously demanding of you and your family. So it's a great deal of respect that we have for you. And we're excited here at New York Law School to call you one of our own. So I have a question, and it harkens back to some of your earlier comments, and I think the joy that I witnessed you experience in teaching. And our audience is an audience of practicing lawyers overwhelmingly, and they have a big responsibility not only to ensure their responsible professional development, but also in mentoring the next generation of lawyers, many of whom will either be prosecutors or have a role somewhere in shaping the impacts of the criminal justice system. What do law schools need to do today, 2021, and what do prosecutors' offices need to do in terms of building a new type of prosecutor and a new generation of responsible and compassionate lawyers?
Yeah. So I say this not because I'm talking to you and on the New York Law School thread, but one of the things, in addition to our friendship, that drew me to New York Law School is what New York Law School is doing, and it's doing it more broadly. But I've experienced it in the criminal law space. The integration of practice and theory is phenomenal. Professor Kaminsky's ACC class, which I had the privilege of co-teaching for one semester, integrating, and I talked to practitioners about it. We got a class where all semester long, the school invests in actors to come in and be the client, be the detective. Faculty is joining in with judges. Our alums are coming and being, judges. When I graduated from law school, I didn't have, I didn't know where the courthouse was. I didn't have that kind of experience. I think that kind of on the ground technical teaching, and then infused as we do so well here with ethics and integrity, and talking about the broader role, as we've always done, but have particularly done in the past 18 months, of the connection to community, what it means to be a lawyer, what it means to be a defense lawyer, what it means to be a prosecutor, and a connection. And given that, as you said, most of the audience is practitioners, I thank them for their partnership in that. And I'll say in our last, kind of my last iteration of this, the hearing we did with the Eric Garner family, one thing, and I may have been my most rewarding thing at NYLS in terms of student interaction, right on par with the ACC class, I'd say, was we had Davis Polk and Gideon Oliver as our co-counsel, pro bono counsel, and they were the extern mentors to our students. And watching the relationships and the investments of those other lawyers in our students, and we can do it as faculty and talk about it and give them some of these nuts and bolts experiences. But then when we pair them up with concerned alums or others in the bar who invest so much in them as 2Ls and 3Ls, just the multiplier effect on that had. And I'm not just saying it from what I observe, it's what the students have told me. And so just thankful to all of the practitioners who are in one way or another investing in our students. And I know that as district attorney-elect, that's going to make my job easier, right? When I go to recruit a student who's had that full-bodied experience, because one thing that's a challenge is these jobs are hard and we're giving them to 26-year-olds in many times, right? And so the more that we can invest in them before that, I think the better it is for the practice of law, in addition to the fulfillment of the students.
Great. Yeah, I love that you said that, because I agree. And, we've had conversations about lived experience, and I think that our students who have had many experiences throughout their lives before coming to law school benefit our classroom. And they also, when they are in those experiential settings, their performance, it outshines. It's tremendous. So we have a lot of work to do at law schools to ensure we can recruit students who bring that fullness, and that will carry that fullness into the profession. How do you build a new prosecutor when you're in the new office, and what does it look like in terms of the strategies to ensure the depth that you want in your prosecutors is retained, that you don't lose them? Retention in public service is so difficult these days, and the investment that public agencies make is not insignificant. What do you think is the strategy, and how can this community that supports you help you with that?
So I remember when you and I walked the campus when I was interviewing, and being struck by your personal relationship with students. You spoke with them, things you knew about of them, and leadership matters, and sort of setting the values from the top. And that's what I want to do at the DA's office, right? To set the kind of principles you set at New York Law School, and then be accessible in that same way. I think, modeling and direct interaction and investment, and it's not just us as the chief lead, but the teams built around us. I think that's the number one thing. And then I think being conscious about who we recruit. When we walked around on that tour, you talked about the diversity in terms of gender diversity. You talked about the diversity in terms of first-time college graduates in the family. So being very conscious, and I think in a way that the academy and certainly New York Law School has done better than institutions in the bar. So being very conscious about the life experiences that we're recruiting, making clear that we're open, and then the way we evaluate and promote. And so really giving equal primacy to community engagement, to judgment calls, and not using what I would call our crude measures, of a conviction rate or arrest rate or volume. I think all of that goes into it, and that's what we're planning to do at the DA's office.
It's extraordinary. And here's my final question, which is something I've also been saying a lot. I view the Manhattan DA, you're not really a local elected official. You are in some ways a prosecutor that the entire nation looks to for leadership. What's the message you hope to send to all current prosecutors in our nation, but also those who see an opportunity through your example to take a lead and to seek election and promote change?
So I'm a Manhattan exceptionalist, as you know about me, Anthony. I think it's the best.
I know.
And so I agree. I mean, this is like, look, we've been to the earlier question about music, our music has traveled, our fashion has traveled, and our view on justice, I think, can travel. So I feel that both opportunity and weight, and I think it's the pairing. I think it's the being very affirmative about saying, you know what, like, I prosecuted people for, very significant drug trafficking, and I represented Ms. Carr. And you can do that and be the chief prosecutor in Manhattan. That means that, folks from other backgrounds who traditionally may have been excluded, other professional backgrounds, say, yeah, I can do that too. So I do feel that weight in that, but really the opportunity. And I will also say, and I think we probably feel this as in New York Law School and other institutions here, is people are very interested. And so there's resources. There are all kinds of people from all over the country reaching out saying, hey, we got this magnet program here. Maybe you should try it. So it is an opportunity, really. And that's why, this is Manhattan. This is New York City. I love it. And I love New York's law school.
Great. Thanks. And New York's law school loves you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for a wonderful morning. Dean Anthony Crowell, terrific questions and comments. District Attorney-elect Alvin Bragg, you have really helped us to understand who you are and what you're going to bring to this office of national importance. And thank you all to our questioners. We had many good questions. And to the audience, thank you so much. We will see you in the new year. Thank you for attending.